Katy, thank you so much for joining me on Incremental Edge. So we've known each other a little while, and every time we speak, we always have fantastic conversations. So I got you to come and join me in the studio so that we can share some of your conversation with our listeners. So thank you for joining me. We often have talked about lots of different things: finance, change management, stakeholder management. So that's where we plan the conversation to go today. But before we do, could you share a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. So I am CFO at UCL Business, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of University College London, and we're responsible for the commercialisation of the intellectual property that comes from their research activity. Quite a lengthy explanation of what we do. But before that, I started off after A-levels, decided I wasn't going to go to university, so needed a meaningful career, mainly to placate my parents with us not going to university. And accountancy seemed an obvious topic for me. I'd really enjoyed the business and economic side of my studies. So was able to get a training contract at a regional firm in Oxford, training as in accounts, audit and tax. And I did my AAT, I did my ACCA, qualified in audit and tax. And by that point had realised that audit probably wasn't the long-term career for me. I'd already, got into the cycle of seeing the same clients each year. And as much as I really enjoyed that, it wasn't what I wanted to do for the next 45 years. So I was lucky enough to be able to move into the corporate finance team in the same practice, and spent 15 years advising owner-managed businesses on selling their companies, acquiring companies, or raising finance. And I became partner in that organisation. Really, really loved the role and the client work and the advisory work. But by this point, I had a young family and the hours weren't really compatible with seeing my children, who I did quite like. So I thought they should probably be prioritised. So at that point, I looked for an in-house role, thinking that would offer me a more manageable work-life balance. I live in Oxford. It's famously a university city. And so they have their own equivalent of my current company, Oxford University Innovation. And I spent 5 years there as their head of finance. It was my first in-house role. An eventful 5 years. We had the pandemic. We had the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, which was a significantly active period in the organisation. And 3 years ago, I moved to UCL to do a similar role there.
Yeah, so interesting. So let's just jump back to corporate finance. What was it about being in that environment that really sort of set you up for working in a commercial role within a university setting?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when you're in that environment, you have to come up to speed on your clients' activities and your clients' environment and competitive factors and ultimately who's going to want to buy them, who are they going to want to buy, all of that. You have to come up to speed very quickly.
Yeah.
But in preparing their company itself for sale, you have to really get under what's happening in their finance function. Can I rely as their advisor on the information that I'm being given?
Yeah.
Is that going to be robust enough so that as soon as a buyer looks at it, it's not all going to crumble? Because ultimately, these are very fragile transactions, and trust and confidence is so important in all of it. And so I think actually that kind of, it might be a 3-month sprint with a client or a 6-month or, some of them 12, 18 months. It was always good to be brought in as soon as possible to help people prepare.
Yeah.
So you get to know them really, really, really well. And you get to give these recommendations for what they can do to make sure that they're sale ready and that they'll withstand a diligence process. And indeed, then the aftermath of the sale, the kind of adjusting to the new systems and so on. There's quite a lot of sort of technical finance stuff there that you need to get to grips with. So you get to know a company really well, and then you switch clients, you complete your project, and then you move on to a new one.
Yeah.
And, it's sort of, at the time, suited very well my short attention span, if you like. I can fully immerse in something.
Yeah.
And then, woohoo, great, complete the project, move on, and then I can do it all over again. But I think that experience in really trying to get to the bottom of things very quickly has helped me in the in-house roles to have a look at actually what really needs fixing in this organisation.
Yeah. I was going to ask actually, what was it like sort of jumping into that in-house role after being more in that advisory seat?
I mean, I feel I should qualify this, that going from corporate finance advice into a university environment, they're worlds apart from one another. And coming from, where you lived by your 90-day plans and so on, the reality check that actually 90 days is a very short time within a university environment. And yes, we're the commercial subsidiary. We have our own board, our own governance, but ultimately on the big ticket items, we still need to work with our parent, as you'd expect, and navigating that. So timings and pace was so different for me, which was great because that was exactly why I made the change, to have a bit more balance in life. But it was a real shock. But I've completely leaned into it now because it gives far more time for pondering, for actually just really kind of making sure that you're structuring things for a long-term benefit rather than just for kind of one project. And I think that's a big change in that, I had to really, if it's me making the change in my own company, I have to really kind of make sure it works. And
of course. You've got to stand by your own decisions and see them
that's
through.
See it through. It's absolutely, you've got to be there for the long term with it, which is really exciting, actually, really satisfying.
Yeah, I bet. And you mentioned that when you came into UCL and into Oxford, but particularly UCL, you had a lot of work to do with the team and really sort of support and bolster them. What was that like as a CFO coming in?
I think it was helpful that it wasn't my first time of doing it. So I was able to just say, it's a relatively small team, a team of 6. So the ability to get to know everybody on an individual level, to understand their differing attitudes to change, appetite for change, and kind of different experience points, because it was really important to me. Quickly identified, a handful of key factors that we needed to build on as a team. But it was really important to me that they could come along on that journey together.
Yeah.
I didn't want something to be done to them. I wanted them to participate in it. And as you know, one of the key ones was our change in the software product, which was huge for the team. And I mean, accountants famously like using what they're used to using. So it's huge change. And it was a big project to run alongside business as usual activity.
Yeah.
And I was already being pulled into different strategic projects as well. So I needed the team to be able to be comfortable with it and drive it when I wasn't there at every opportunity. So I had to understand and identify the bits that would make it better for each of them and sell it to them.
Yeah.
I'm lucky. They're a great team and they really got on board with it. But I think taking the time to understand what would make them tick so that they would work with me rather than resist it was key.
Yeah, I can imagine. What was it that you lent into with technology? What were you trying to change, or the outcome that you were trying to achieve? Because often it's not, let's just buy a new piece of software. There's a few further steps to get what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in many ways, kind of what happens under the bonnet of the sales ledger is less of interest to me. I needed the data. I needed robust management accounts on a timely fashion, but also I needed the ability to really analyse what was happening. So actually to, I suppose, slice and dice different aspects of my GL, what's happening on these revenue streams, what's happening with the company. So the playing with the data. And with the system that I'd inherited, it wasn't even in a format that you could dump it all into Excel and then play with it. Right. It was just kind of gluing together lots of different things. So having something that's more agile and much easier to extract or indeed get it from source was absolutely key for me, because that data informs almost everything we do as an organisation.
Yeah, and when we've talked in the past about it, you talked about stakeholder management being a massive part of what you do within your role. How does that data help with the stakeholder management, or bringing them on board in what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's crucial, for our university parent. They're really keen to understand, the output of what's happening from their investment in the research, but also the financial return that will come to them, to their employees, or to their research partners. So having the visibility of that, because we're on a completely different system, it's blind to them. So the ability to design reports that can satisfy their needs, and their needs are going to be slightly different from our internal reporting needs. So the ability to gel it together and design a report for them as well was really important. But actually, their cycles, their forecasting cycles, are on a different rota to ours, because we're different organisations. Same year ends, but actually their governance dates are different to ours. And so we didn't want to have to completely refresh everything every time a stakeholder needed the data. We needed it to be live, we needed it to be agile, and we needed it to be easy to get, because ultimately it's part of the service that we offer, both to our parent but also to the research funders that sit alongside us, that will let you know what's happening on a project. Yeah,
makes sense. So it sounded like you went in with a lot to do. How did you decide what to focus on in that first sort of 3 months or first year that you were in role?
For me, stable function, core function. So fixing the policies that have been causing some consternation, getting to know the team and establishing trust with them, and sorting out the accounting data and the software were that was my 90-day plan. I think I had the agreement to go out to get new software done in the first 90 days. It took us a bit longer to actually then start the project, but that was absolutely cool, because I needed to know the baseline before I could move forward with anything else. And actually that then feeds into understanding better what's in our portfolio. I'm not the scientists that kind of decide what's happening with this research or with the commercialisation of it, but knowing the diversification that there may or may not be in there was really important from a risk assessment.
Yeah, and I suppose that ties into your past in corporate finance, where data was so key to understanding that picture of a business and what it was doing, that getting to that baseline, it makes sense that
it's my comfort blanket, isn't it? Absolutely. Give me the facts and figures and I'll work it out from there.
Yeah. And so after all that was in place, what was next to get you there?
What was next on kind of my radar, or what was next to get me, what kept me occupied? I mean, I suppose to get the finance function to work, and it's absolutely now where I want it to be, and I'm delighted with the whole team. They've come a long way, and it is fantastic how they've performed. That took longer than I expected. I thought, we'll have that all done in 18 months, and it probably took 2.5, 3 years to get there. Because in small organisations, there are always other factors going on. You've got audit to contend with. We had a university internal audit to contend with, bigger projects and all of that. So actually, the real success was when the team started routinely closing on working day 4 or 5, and before that it had taken perhaps a month for them to close, and kind of a variety in between. And I think some of that was undoubtedly cultural. I don't think there had necessarily been a me before going, I need this, I need this, I need to know what it says, and I need to then share it with the leadership team. So shifting that prioritisation, even once we had the tools in place, it took time because it was a real behavioural shift of actually, do you know what, during month end, that's all you focus on.
Yeah,
and
that's
you
the
manage
priority.
your diary accordingly. And to make that shift, it's quite painful for the team, because it means you're going to have a couple of months where they're trying to spin everything at the same time until they've embrace the change and everyone around them understands the change. Because if you don't protect that window with everything you've got, then it's impossible to deal with everything at the same time.
Yeah.
But now we're there, they love mid-month. And that this is the hat I'm wearing on, those days of the month. And then for the rest of it, we do the other business as usual activity.
Yeah. And so
Fantastic.
what does mid-month look like then for the team if they're not sort of stuck in the...
What do they do if they're not doing month ends? I mean, they do all of the important stuff at that point. So checking our contracts. Do we need it to chase for any royalty reports? Are we invoicing accordingly? Credit control. Do we need to pay people? Apparently, that's an important part of the function. And responding to ever increasing reporting requests from our parents, rightly so, from the research funders, from the government. Everybody is becoming as data hungry as I am. Everybody wants a piece of it.
Yeah, and is that a real shift that you've seen over time, that people are wanting to get the insight because they now know it's there and can trust it, or there's more requirement for you to deliver a different type of insight?
I think it's both. I think we're still in that kind of foundational, the more we give people, the more that actually...
Yeah, can I look at it this way?
Yeah, can you produce this? Can you produce this? So it's always going to be a increasing requirement. I think it's never going to stop. We'll never be like, right, we've got our suite reporting done and that's it. You can just push a button every month and off you go. But that's where the stimulating part comes from it, because providing that data then leads to further conversations actually about, well, what can we do next, what we should be looking at, and that's where the finance function helps to drive the rest of the company forward.
Yeah, and that's something you and I have talked about in the past, that you're much more involved in the business than maybe a CFO would have been 10 years ago. Could you share a bit about what that looks like within a business like UCLB?
So I, as you'd expect, and I think as all CFOs do, I sit in the senior leadership team, but I work closely with all of my colleagues in that. So I work really closely with the operations function, and I think a traditional accounting brain is very process driven, particularly if you've come through the audit route, because it's all about controls, it's all about systems and that risk assessment. Yeah. And I think that dovetails really neatly with the operations function, because operations fundamentally is about getting things done as efficiently as they possibly can be. And that combination works really well in my company, because it's just that kind of, it's not everything has to be determined on a cost per minute basis, but actually having the flow of information and the flow of activity work in a coherent fashion, it makes it better for all of us. And it's not just because it helps me to better understand the data that comes through at the end of it, but I think that in a lot of companies of our size, functions have just sort of evolved. You might have originally had one person doing 5 things, but then teams are built, but the continuity between them can get lost. And I think before hybrid working, people were generally all in the same office at all times, and therefore it wasn't as evident, because you could just go and ask.
Yeah, go sit next to someone and dig into what they do.
And I think hybrid working has really shone that light onto, actually, if it's not there somewhere in a system, it doesn't really exist, does it? So the need to streamline it all has become far more evident, I think.
Yeah.
So I do think that finance and operations dovetail really, really neatly because of the systems focus. But because of the nature of what my company does, our director of biopharm and our director of physical sciences, it's really important that I work closely with them. Because that's understanding what our portfolio assets are doing, what they mean, potentially where our next big income generators could be coming from. And for me, that means, well, actually on the stakeholder management side, there are people that I need to kind of keep informed on that front, you know, because not everybody likes a surprise chunk of money coming their way. They like to be able to plan for it, anticipate what they may or may not do. So all of these nuggets of information in each area of the business generally result in I need to have a conversation with somebody to let them know,
Yeah.
maybe good or bad news, but need to let them know what's happening.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, we talked a little bit about it, but then the underlying technology feels like it's an enabler for those conversations rather than it's the be all and end all of what you're doing.
Exactly that. And I think, you know, it's a rare treat if I get to spend a day playing with a spreadsheet or designing something within the accounting software. I'm generally grabbing the data and then running off for those meetings to actually have the strategic discussion about, well, either what does this mean and what do we do with it, or how can we progress this, or do we need to change what we're doing to respond to it. Yeah, and I think as an organisation, you know, it's as long as we get the output and it's intuitive to use, then the black box is I'm happy for that to remain a black box. It's becoming increasingly important, though, as I was saying, with the hybrid working, really having the visibility, no matter where you are or at what point you're looking for it, is really critical. And with the increasing data demands, it just highlights all of the areas where you can enhance what's happening. We're, like many organisations at the moment, we're looking at putting in a CRM and a workflow management package that sits across the whole organisation. So, you know, the finance team are used to working in their wonderful world of their accounting software and producing the reports for those that need it. But for the finance team, it will be a new world to have that then connected to a broader piece. But similarly for other functions in the organisation, they're used to doing what they do. We've all embraced SharePoint like every other organisation, and I suppose that's one step to having that kind of visibility and transparency, but having something that completely sits above it all, for me, very exciting. And I miss working in an organisation that naturally has it. For the company, it's quite radical to put in something like this and to understand, well, who needs to see what? Why do they need to see different things? What does that mean for me? Am I being scrutinised? Are people that don't understand my role going to be judging me on things? So it's very easy to say there's this magical tool that will fix a lot of things, but actually, again, the journey to take the organisation through it is huge. Many of them have never used it before, and therefore, you know, it's a big leap of faith to get to the other side of something. Again, it's a project that takes resource when you're doing your day job, but it's critically important that the project does get that input from everybody. We want it to be a good system that people enjoy using and that gets the correct outputs, rather than a system that people hate, you know.
We ignore, and then your investment's wasted anyway.
If it's not adopted with enthusiasm, then it's a real uphill struggle, and therefore it can't just be designed by our IT colleagues, it can't just be designed by our operations colleagues. It has to be a real collaboration across the whole organisation. And for me, the sweet mix is when you have people who know intimately the way the organisation has historically done things, because quite often, even for some of the processes that might seem a bit baffling, there is a good reason. Or sometimes it's just that 15 years ago that was important.
There might have been a good reason then.
So someone needs to stand back, but it's also useful putting in on the experience of people that have seen other systems, other processes, and can add to it. Now, my role in this, obviously keeping an eye on the budget, it's a significant investment. But also, because I have a good visibility across the whole organisation, to kind of gel things together and say, well, actually, if this is happening over here, then really it needs to connect to what's happening over here, and these people need to see it. So it's a really interesting position to be in. I'm not running the project, but I'm definitely actively interfering in it.
And I think that's really interesting, because when you think about implementing something like a CRM, you wouldn't naturally think of finance being a really key part of architecting those processes and helping the business to embrace and build to an outcome that's worthwhile for the organisation. How do you sort of tackle those sorts of projects and add value to them when people are seeing you as the person with the purse strings, or you're there to watch the budget and actually you've got so much more to add to that type of project?
I think people are able to understand I've got a dual interest in this, and I do become quite animated and enthusiastic in my personality when I'm like, well, won't this be exciting if this thing that happens over here can then make this thing happen over here? And none of them are to do with the finance function, because that kind of gets glued in at the end through the magic of APIs and all of that. So I think because of my professional interest in getting to understand a business really well, it helps me to form the view of, okay, this great stuff's happening here, and then it's either duplicated here or doesn't quite flow through or misses out a point that happens. So it's almost as though there's just the recipe of all of the different bits of my roles previously can help me just go, well, actually, this is a good way for it to
you can
flow.
see all those little bits and how they need to flow from one to the other.
Personal motive in it as well, that again, the quality of the data, it all then helps to arm me with the strategic conversations I need to have, because it's rare that a stakeholder meeting I have is purely about the numbers. It needs the wider piece that goes along. It needs the context, and it needs the either the background or the future analysis. So it's all important to me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And with your foundational finance system and then this project, I can imagine there's a lot of people management and bringing them on the journey with you. How do you tackle that side of a digital change project?
Great question, and there's no silver bullet for it. We are being really careful to keep the company informed at all stages of the project. So we're coming to the end of the initial scoping, and we've pulled in as many relevant colleagues as we can. So it's not just the leadership team saying this is what we think should happen. We're actually getting the people that are, doing their day job, talking about their day job, talking about their pain points, and we have good trust in our consultants to identify solutions for them. So active involvement and collaboration in the scoping phase is really important. But also being mindful, it's not the first time I've done a project like this, whether it's on the finance scale or on a CRM scale, but being mindful of actually, well, when are we going to be scheduling UAT? Is that actually going to be at a time that's convenient for people? So respecting normal workflows alongside a project like this is really important. I also think we'll have a programme of change management training courses and coaching, because I'm really fortunate to work with highly motivated colleagues, but we're all human and we all like doing things the way we know how to do things. And so actually to move things progressively is a nicer way to do it. I mean, fundamentally, there's also we just turn off the old system and you have no other choice, but that's a real last resort. So
sink or swim.
Yeah,
maybe not the way to bring everyone on the journey
exactly
with you.
That. But then also having a system where you can see where the gaps are, and then you can try and understand better what's happening with them. And maybe there are better people to be filling those gaps. Getting the right functions in the right roles mixed together also helps.
So a big part of what we've been talking about all really stems from building trust, both with your team but wider organisation. What would you say is the key element to building that trust?
I think there's different answers to that. With the team, each time I've joined a new organisation, I found the most effective way to build the trust is actually really rolling up my sleeves and getting hands-on. Either helping to fix something, and I can, use that to demonstrate my understanding, but also it's just a different way of working with somebody and you naturally start to build that relationship. or to just help them resolve something or push it, and demonstrating that actually, as the finance leader, I've got the team's back. I'm there to support them, and I understand their issues, and I'm there to help get things right. It's different with different stakeholder groups, with my board and with my university. It's much more about stepping outside of the numbers and sitting down where you get the opportunity to say, well, actually, what is it that you really need to understand from the business, not just the numbers. The numbers can be quite, standard, what you'd see in a P&L and so on. What is it that you really need to draw out? And actually, these are the matters on our roadmap. What do you need to know about it? And I think it's been really effective to have a full transparency approach. I think there are different schools, aren't there? And some people like to deliver information on a need-to-know basis, and that works really well in some environments. In the environment that I work in, actually demonstrating that I am open and trustworthy and happy to have a broad conversation. It might not be an easy conversation, but a broad conversation with my board or with my parent really helps. And actually, again, from my perspective, this allows me to get the feedback for what they're looking for, or to test their reaction to things, so that when I do deliver a proposal, it's not landing completely cold, and I've had that input, and it streamlines the process a little bit.
Yeah, and I can imagine with the parent company particularly, it's a different beast, it's a different type of organisation. So how do you manage that lack of knowledge of what you're doing as a business on a day-to-day basis compared to the parent, and then needing them on board and supporting what you're doing?
I mean, that's such an astute question, because obviously research-intensive universities, they're huge. UCL employs 20,000 people, it's massive. And there's not one person that makes every decision in the organisation. So my starting point is to kind of map out, well, actually, what's my governance route? What's my reporting route? There are multiple committees, and how do we navigate through that? I've learnt by experience, and not necessarily at UCL, that going into one of these committees without understanding who you need to win over, because there's such a broad, diverse range of people. You'll have student representatives, you'll have finance representatives, you'll have academic representatives, and depending on the topic, there will be different people that hold influence in that room.
Right.
So you need to understand, or have a good guess at, well, actually, who are the committee going to be looking at to shed their expertise on it. And it's really valuable if you can get pre-briefings. Sometimes I'll feel like I'm having the same proposal meeting 12 times, but actually, again, to test their response, to get the feedback, and to take something before it's fully shaped, so that you can collaborate with these experts as well.
Yeah.
It's a very important process, I think, in navigating a complex organisation of, well, let's just socialise it, and hopefully by the time we then get into the formal committee environment, enough people understand the specifics of the project that we're trying to do, because there's such a breadth of activity in a university.
Yeah, and I suppose there's some parallels in there to your corporate finance days as well. If you were bringing a business to market, early conversations and
absolutely.
interest.
You want to talk to the VCs, you want to talk to your potential buyers, their advisors, all of that. So I think it's probably a learned technique of actually, well, let's just do your market research, I suppose.
Yeah. And you mentioned governance there. How do you operate at pace in a highly governed environment, or can you?
You can, and we're really lucky because UCL is a very dynamic and commercial university. They have their formal process. they are willing to put in sub-reference groups, working groups. It all sounds quite cumbersome, but actually it's a way that the university can operate in a more agile fashion. So authority can be delegated to these groups, which will be with the specific experts from their councils or committees there, and will participate in that. So again, early socialisation, because nobody likes surprises as there's something massive happening and you will need to give it your full attention. So understanding your roadmap as early as you possibly can to then say, we think in 2 months we're going to need this decision, so how do we work with you to get there? And I think that's probably why I'm so fixated on stakeholder relations, because it's absolutely crucial in the environment that I work in to keep people up to speed.
Yeah.
So that when we have something coming along, we can hopefully navigate it.
Yeah. And how was that different when you were in the middle of the pandemic and having to go at a pace that no one was used to and prepared for, and needing to get to, I suppose, results that the whole world needed from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think in that project, you know, in the early days, my life science colleagues sheltered a huge amount of that burden of actually, and the university and the government took on a huge piece. So I wasn't directly involved to a significant degree in the original contract and license. You know, there's this, can you review the commercial terms and turn it around in like 20 minutes?
Yeah.
But these were in the early days when everyone was sat by their laptop anyway, not really knowing what else to do. So my active role in that became actually once the vaccine was starting to be sold, and therefore the reporting, the tracking and all of that. But universities can. And the power that Oxford was able to deploy to actually get that drug to market through clinical trials in a remarkable amount of time was astonishing. So, you know, they can do it, but they just can't do it for every project that's going.
Yeah. Yeah, gosh, I can't imagine what it must have been like, even just being on the edges of all of that when it was happening. It must have been, you must have come out the other side and breathed a sigh of relief. And
it was intense, but of course at the same time, like every other company, we're also trying to work out, well, what's it like working from home? How are we keeping our employees happy? You know, all of those once in a career factors that we were all working through. You know, in some ways the vaccine negotiation was just another very random thing on top of it. So it was, I have hazy memories of those months. It was full on.
Yeah, I bet.
But I don't think I'm alone in that.
No, definitely not. I think whatever people's experience was, you know, it all feels a bit strange now, doesn't it? And a bit not as believable as it did at the time. So coming back to you and your role as a CFO, what do you think you've learned in these different roles that you take forward into projects or sort of future roles that you'll do?
I think it's the process of, if you explain a problem to somebody, you often find the solution in making the explanation. It helps my brain process the more I talk about things, like a natter about these things, and it just helps me to kind of process and move it on each time. So in earlier days in my career, I think I'd have just made more snap decisions and gone with it. Whereas now I really like to, where you can, take a bit more time to just try and get it right first time. I've always worked in what I would call professional service organisations, and therefore the people piece is huge. And I think I kind of crossed a bit of a generation that, you know, when we were training, you did what you were told and time was money and all of that. And we're in a really nice new world now to a person of my age, where you kind of like, actually, there's much more of a balance to it. But I think it's even more important to recognise that you are bringing individuals along with you. You can't just dictate and expect it to work effectively. So that's probably another reason why I take more time to pause and just consider and are we doing the right thing for the right people?
Yeah. So, final question I always ask my podcast guests: if there was one thing that our audience could do this week to get the kind of progress we've been talking about through this conversation, what would it be?
Well, this week's a bit of a stretch, but I think an ethos to adapt. I mean, firstly, know your foundations really well. If you're there as the CFO or finance controller or whatever your role is, know it inside out. Know your facts and figures, so you don't need to think about it. That really helps to instill everyone's belief in your own personal credibility.
Yeah.
And it saves you time from having to go and dust it off every time you're asked a question. So I think know your basics really, really well. But then to build on that, I think don't be shy in asking to be involved in things, you know, bother people. So if there's a project that it doesn't have to be strictly finance related, but actually if there's a project going on you want to be involved in, I mean, maybe have a think about what you can bring to it to explain why you want to be involved in it, but ask or pester, you know, have some confidence and tenacity to get involved in different things, and it really quickly broadens your skill set.
Yeah, I love that. And something I always advise my teams to jump in, get involved, like you say, sort of explain what you're going to bring to the party, because sometimes people won't see that what the dimension you've got will add to a project, particularly strategic projects where it requires so much collaboration and different points of view to help get it over the line.
But that's the beauty of it as well, because then you develop, when you're in that environment, you get to understand everyone else's needs and viewpoints, and so it just really helps for the next project you're on. So yeah,
and comes back to that stakeholder management piece that's been a real thread through the whole conversation. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and views, and I think we can take an awful lot from that and really remember that those foundations are really key, but that strategic stakeholder management and change management view is so important for businesses to move forward in change in a way that is going to be beneficial to everyone. So thank you, Katy.
Oh, thank you. You're very kind.
How will people get hold of you if they want to reach out?
LinkedIn is the best forum to get hold of me. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emma.